How dare you hurt my mother? Thane Caldwell's voice thundered through the penthouse, his eyes blazing with betrayal. The Chelsea skyline glowed with sunset hues, but the warmth vanished as he stood frozen, clutching a shattered kind of blue vinyl. He'd slipped in quietly, eager to surprise Etta, his black adoptive mother, with a gift. Instead, harsh shouts drew him to the living room. There, Seraphina, radiant in white silk, kicked Etta's leg, toppling her cane. "You're useless, Etta. Thane only keeps you out of pity," she sneered, voice sharp as a blade. Etta, 60, clung to the sofa, her pained eyes defiant. The vinyl hit the floor, splintering. "Seraphina, what have you done?" Thane roared, heartbroken. What secrets hid behind her charm? Could love survive such cruelty? Rate this tale. 1 for gripping, 0 for not. Stay to uncover the shocking truth. Thane Caldwell leaned against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Chelsea penthouse, the Hudson River shimmering below like a ribbon of molten silver. The New York skyline pulsed with life, taxi horns blaring, distant laughter from rooftop bars, the faint wail of a saxophone drifting from a street performer in Greenwich Village. At 32, Thane had conquered the tech world, his software empire securing fortunes for corporations and governments alike. Yet as he traced the skyline with a calloused finger, a familiar ache stirred in his chest. Success had built this glass palace, but it couldn't fill the voids of a childhood spent in Brooklyn's foster homes, where he'd been a pale outcast in a vibrant, gritty world. In his hand, he held a worn fountain pen, its barrel engraved with Etta in delicate script. It was a gift from his adoptive mother, Etta Jackson, given the day he left for MIT, her eyes glistening with pride. "Write your dreams, Thane," she'd said, her voice rich with the soul of Harlem's old clubs. "But never forget where your heart belongs." Etta, a 62-year-old black woman, had been his salvation. Abandoned at 4, Thane had bounced through foster homes until Etta, a former soul singer and dancer, took him in. She'd traded her stage dreams for double shifts at a diner and a seamstress's needle, ensuring he had books, clothes, and hope. Her laughter, warm as a summer night, had taught him resilience. Her stories of Harlem's soul scene had given him roots. Now Etta lived in a corner of this penthouse, her room a sanctuary of memory. A faded poster from her days at the Lenox Lounge hung above a shelf of vinyls. Aretha Franklin, Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, each record a chapter of her life. She'd sit by her window, cane resting against her knee, humming "A Change Is Gonna Come" as the city buzzed below. Thane had given her everything: private doctors, silk scarves, a view of the river. But his long hours left her alone too often. Guilt gnawed at him. "I'll make time soon, Ma," he'd promise, kissing her forehead. Her smile, always forgiving, hid a quiet sadness he couldn't quite read. Enter Seraphina Voss, the woman who'd swept into Thane's life like a summer storm. At 29, she was a vision of ambition, her blonde hair catching light like spun gold, her sharp wit commanding rooms at MoMA galas and Soho art openings. They'd met at a charity auction, her knowledge of street art sparking a conversation that lasted until dawn. She wore his gifts, pearl necklaces, designer gowns. Like badges of triumph, her Instagram posts a gallery of their glittering life. "This is forever," she'd whispered at a rooftop party, her fingers laced with his. Thane believed her, dazzled by her charm, convinced she'd complete the family he craved. But sometimes when she laughed too loudly at a donor's joke, he sensed a hollowness, a note off-key. Seraphina played the doting partner in public, but Etta saw through her. At dinners, she'd bring out a tea, her smile practiced. "You must be so proud of Thane," she'd say, but her eyes darted away, as if Etta's presence was a smudge on her perfect canvas. Etta, ever gracious, nodded, her hands folded tightly. "He's my miracle," she'd reply, her voice steady despite the cane she now needed for her aching joints. Thane missed the subtle chill in Seraphina's glances, too caught in her orbit. But Etta, who'd survived Harlem's toughest nights, knew the weight of unspoken scorn. She kept silent, her love for Thane a shield against hurt. Tonight, Thane stood in his study, the pen in his hand tracing absent circles. He'd just closed a deal in Boston, a triumph that would headline Forbes, but his thoughts drifted to Etta. He hadn't called her today, too swept up in meetings. The pen felt heavy, a reminder of her faith in him. He crossed to her room, pausing at the door. Inside, Etta swayed gently to Sam Cooke's voice, her eyes closed, lost in memory. "You still dancing, Ma?" he teased, leaning against the frame. She opened her eyes, her smile lighting the room. "Always, baby. You gonna join me one day?" Thane chuckled, promising, "Soon." But his phone buzzed. Seraphina, texting about a gala. "Gotta run, Ma," he said, kissing her cheek. Her nod was soft, but her eyes held a flicker of something unspoken. Outside, New York thrummed. Streetlights flickering, vendors hawking hot dogs, the city's pulse relentless. Thane stepped into the elevator, Seraphina's text glowing on his screen. "Meet me at the gala. Wear the blue suit." He smiled, imagining her in a crowd, dazzling as always. But as the doors closed, a memory surfaced. Etta teaching him to tie his shoes, her hands patient, her voice singing softly. He pushed it aside, unaware of the storm brewing in his own home. Seraphina's laughter, Etta's silence, and the city's hum held secrets he couldn't yet see. What lay behind those polished smiles? Would you love to withstand the truths waiting to surface? Etta Jackson's fingers traced the edge of a faded poster on her wall, the ink capturing her younger self mid-spin, her dress flaring under Harlem stage lights. The memory of those nights, sweat, soul, and applause, felt like a distant dream, yet it pulsed in her heart as she hummed Chain of Fools softly to herself. At 62, her body ached, her cane a constant companion, but her spirit still danced. She glanced at the photo of her and Thane, a boy of 10 grinning beside her at a Brooklyn fair, ice cream smeared on his cheek. That boy, now a billionaire, was her miracle. But the weight of his absence pressed harder each day. She'd raised him with love, not expecting him to drift so far into his glittering world. Thane had promised to join her for dinner tonight, a rare break from his whirlwind of meetings and galas. Etta set the table with care, her hands trembling as she placed a single daisy in a vase, a nod to the flowers Thane used to pick for her from Brooklyn's cracked sidewalks. Her heart swelled with hope, but a quiet fear lingered. He'd been distant lately, pulled by Seraphina's charm and the demands of his empire. He's building his future, she told herself, pushing down the ache. But her eyes caught the flicker of loneliness in the mirror, a shadow she couldn't shake. Thane, meanwhile, sat in a cab weaving through Manhattan's chaos, the city's neon glow blurring past. His thumb rubbed the engraved Etta on his fountain pen, a tether to the woman who'd given him everything. Guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't sat with her in weeks, too caught up in boardrooms in Seraphina's orbit. He remembered her teaching him to dance in their cramped apartment, her laughter filling the gaps where hunger lingered. "Step light, Thane, like your heart's free," she'd say, spinning him until they collapsed in giggles. Now he was spinning in a different world, one Etta barely fit into. "I'll make it up to her," he vowed, clutching the pen tighter. Seraphina Voss, radiant and sharp-edged, waited for him at a Soho gallery, her presence commanding the room. She'd texted him to meet her there before dinner, her words laced with urgency. "We need to shine tonight, Thane." He arrived, her smile dazzling under the chandelier's glow. But her touch felt calculated, her fingers brushing his arm like a painter, perfecting a stroke. "You're late," she teased, handing him a glass of champagne. "This crowd could open doors for us." Thane nodded, but his thoughts drifted to Etta, waiting alone. Seraphina's eyes flicked to her phone, her smile tightening when he mentioned dinner with his mother. "Etta will understand," she said, her tone clipped. "She always does." Back at the penthouse, Etta's hope dimmed as the clock ticked past 7. She sat by her window, the river's shimmer a faint comfort. Her vinyl of Otis Redding's "Try a Little Tenderness" spun softly, its notes wrapping around her like an old friend. But the silence of the empty table stung. She'd heard Seraphina's barbed comments before. Small, cutting things, like calling her music outdated or her stories pointless. Etta bore them quietly, her love for Thane a shield. But tonight, alone, she felt the weight of Seraphina's disdain. She touched the photo of Thane, whispering, "You're my star, baby. Don't lose your way." Seraphina's cruelty had sharpened in Thane's absence. Days ago, she'd knocked over Etta's cane during a rushed morning, snapping, "Move faster, Etta. This isn't a nursing home." Etta had steadied herself against the wall, her heart pounding, but said nothing. Another time, Seraphina had tossed Etta's favorite scarf, a gift from Thane, into a closet, muttering, "This clutter ruins my aesthetic." Etta retrieved it, her fingers brushing the soft fabric, memories of Thane's proud smile flooding back. She'd written in her journal, hidden in a drawer, "I won't let her break us, but oh, it hurts." Her silence was a sacrifice, protecting Thane's happiness. Thane, caught in the gallery's buzz, felt a pang as he glanced at his watch. "I need to get home," he told Seraphina, his voice firm. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance breaking her perfect mask. "Etta's fine, Thane. She's used to being alone," she said, her words smooth but edged with ice. He frowned, sensing something off, but her hand on his shoulder pulled him back into the crowd. "Stay a bit longer," she urged, her smile allure. He relented, the pen in his pocket heavy with guilt. Etta, meanwhile, stood slowly, her cane clicking against the floor. She moved to the kitchen, covering the untouched dinner with a sigh. The soul music faded, leaving only the city's hum. She looked at the daisy, its petals drooping, and felt a tear slip down her cheek. "He'll come, won't he?" she murmured, her voice breaking. But deep down she feared the distance growing between them, a chasm widened by Seraphina's calculated charm. What lay behind those perfect smiles? Could Etta's love hold Thane close, or would the city's glitter pull him away forever? Thane Caldwell's heart tugged as he stepped out of the Soho gallery, the night air sharp with the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Seraphina's laughter still echoed in his ears, her arm looped through his as they'd worked the crowd. But her words about Etta, "She's used to being alone," gnawed at him. He clutched the fountain pen in his pocket, its engraved Etta, a silent reproach. He'd promised his mother dinner, yet here he was, swept into another of Seraphina's glittering spectacles. The guilt was a stone in his chest, heavy with memories of Etta's warm hands guiding his clumsy tap dance steps, her voice singing, "Ain't No Sunshine," to chase away his childhood fears. He hailed a cab, determined to make it home, to see her smile again. Etta sat alone in her room, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows on the poster of her Lenox Lounge days. The vinyl of Sam Cooke had stopped spinning, leaving only the faint hum of the city outside. Her fingers brushed the daisy in its vase, now wilted, a mirror to the hope she'd clung to hours ago. Thane hadn't come. She swallowed the ache, her pride a fragile shield. Seraphina's barbs had grown sharper lately, each one a needle in her heart. Yesterday, she'd overheard Seraphina on the phone, her voice dripping with disdain. "Etta's just baggage from Thane's past. I'm his future." Etta's hand trembled as she wrote in her journal, hidden in a drawer, "I won't break his heart with this. He loves her." But the words felt like a betrayal of her own soul. Seraphina's cruelty thrived in the shadows of Thane's absence. Days earlier, she'd accidentally spilled wine on Etta's cherished scarf, the one Thane had given her for her 60th birthday. "Oops, my hand slipped," she'd said, her smile razor thin as Etta scrambled to blot the stain, her eyes stinging. Another time she'd turned off the heater in Etta's room during a chilly night, claiming it was too stuffy. Etta had shivered under a thin blanket, her joints aching, but said nothing, her silence a gift to Thane's happiness. Seraphina's words cut deepest when no one was watching. "You're a relic, Etta." Thane's moved on to bigger things. Each insult was a wound, but Etta bore them, her love for her son a quiet fortress. Thane in the cab stared at the city's blur, his mind replaying Etta's stories of Harlem's soul clubs, where she danced under neon lights, her spirit unbreakable. He felt a pang, realizing how rarely he asked about those days now. Seraphina filled his world with galas and deals, but her dismissal of Etta, those fleeting, sharp comments, began to echo louder. At a recent dinner, she'd cut Etta off mid-story about singing with a local band, saying, "Let's talk about something relevant." Thane had frowned, but Seraphina's quick kiss had smoothed it over. Now doubt crept in, a whisper he couldn't ignore. "Is she right for us, Ma?" he murmured to himself, the pen warm in his hand. Back at the penthouse, Etta stood slowly, her cane steadying her. She moved to the kitchen, wrapping the untouched dinner in foil, each motion heavy with resignation. Seraphina had returned alone, her heels clicking as she breezed past Etta's room. "Still up, Etta?" she called, her tone syrupy but edged with mockery. "You shouldn't wait for Thane. He's busy building our life." Etta nodded, her throat tight, and retreated to her chair. She opened her journal, writing, "Her words are poison, but I won't let them touch him." The city's lights flickered outside, a stark contrast to the darkness creeping into her heart. Seraphina, in her room, scrolled through her phone, her face lit by the glow of likes and comments. She'd posted a photo from the gallery captioned, "Living the dream with my king." But her thoughts were on Etta, the stubborn anchor tying Thane to a past she despised. She'd planned a weekend in the Hamptons, ensuring Thane would miss another evening with his mother. "He'll forget her soon enough," she whispered, her smile cold. She remembered pushing Etta's cane aside last week, watching her stumble, and felt no remorse. "This is my world now," she told her reflection, unaware of the storm her actions were brewing. Thane's cab pulled up to the penthouse, his heart racing with a need to see Etta. He stepped into the elevator, the pen in his pocket a lifeline. He pictured her face, her laughter, the way she taught him to face the world. But a memory surfaced, Seraphina's sigh when Etta joined them for breakfast, her muttered, "She's always here." He shook it off, but the unease lingered, a crack in the perfect life he'd built. As the elevator doors opened, he heard faint music, Etta's soul records, a beacon in the night. Would he see the truth before it was too late? Could love withstand the shadows growing in his home? Thane Caldwell stepped out of the elevator, the faint strains of Otis Redding's "I've Been Loving You Too Long" seeping through the penthouse door, a melody that tugged at his heart. The music was Etta's, a beacon of her soulful resilience, but it couldn't drown out the unease that had settled in his chest. Seraphina's words from the gallery, "She's used to being alone," echoed like a sour note, clashing with the memory of Etta's warm embrace. He gripped the fountain pen in his pocket, its engraved Etta grounding him as he crossed the threshold, determined to bridge the distance he'd let grow. But the air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken, as if the walls held secrets he hadn't yet grasped. He called out, "Ma, I'm home." His voice was soft, hopeful, but the silence that answered felt like a warning. Etta sat in her armchair, her hands folded over her journal, the pages filled with prayers she'd never voice. The music swirled around her, a comfort against the sting of Seraphina's latest jab. Hours earlier, Seraphina had swept into her room, tossing a stack of Etta's old performance programs onto the floor. "These relics clutter my space," she'd snapped, her eyes glinting with contempt. Etta had knelt, her joints protesting, to gather the scattered memories. Ticket stubs, faded flyers from Harlem soul nights, each one a piece of her heart. She'd said nothing, her silence a shield for Thane, but the weight of it pressed against her chest. "He loves her," she whispered to herself, tracing the photo of her and Thane at the Brooklyn Fair. Her eyes burned, but she blinked back tears, refusing to let Seraphina's poison taint her love. Seraphina's cruelty had sharpened into something deliberate, a campaign waged in Thane's absence. Last week, she'd misplaced Etta's pain medication, leaving her to endure a night of throbbing joints. When Etta found the bottle tucked behind a vase, Seraphina shrugged. "You must have forgotten where you put it, Etta. Age does that." The words cut deeper than the pain, but Etta swallowed her hurt, writing in her journal, "I won't burden him. He deserves happiness." Another time, Seraphina had rearranged Etta's room, moving her cherished record player to a corner, claiming it disrupted the aesthetic. Etta had dragged it back, her hands shaking, only to hear Seraphina mutter, "You're more trouble than you're worth." Each slight was a wound, but Etta bore them, her love for Thane a quiet defiance. Thane found Etta in her room, her face lit by the soft glow of a lamp. "Ma, I'm sorry I missed dinner," he said, kneeling beside her. Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a flicker of pain he couldn't place. "You're here now, baby," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her bones. He noticed the scattered programs on her shelf, out of order, and frowned. "Did something happen?" he asked, his heart tightening. Etta hesitated, her fingers brushing the journal. "Just tidying up," she lied, her smile a fragile mask. Thane's unease grew, a shadow cast by Seraphina's dismissive comments at the gallery. He touched her hand, feeling the weight of her silence. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" he pressed, his voice low. Etta nodded, but her eyes drifted to the window, hiding the truth. Seraphina glided into the room, her presence like a cold draft. "Thane, you're back early," she said, her smile practiced but her tone sharp. "Etta and I were just catching up." Her words were sweet, but her glance at Etta was a blade, unnoticed by Thane. She'd spent the evening planning a charity event, ensuring Thane would be too busy to notice Etta's fading light. Yesterday, she'd sabotaged Etta's phone, deleting her contacts with a smirk. "You don't need those old friends, Etta. They're not our circle." Etta had sat in silence, her connection to Harlem severed, but she'd written in her journal, "I'll hold on for him." Seraphina's heart was a locked vault, her ambition blinding her to the pain she sowed. Thane felt the tension, a rift he couldn't name. He looked at Etta, her hands clutching the journal, and at Seraphina, her smile too perfect. "Let's all have breakfast tomorrow," he suggested, hoping to mend whatever was breaking. Seraphina's eyes flickered with annoyance, but she nodded. "Of course, darling," she said, her voice honeyed. Etta's smile faltered, knowing Seraphina would find a way to exclude her. As Thane kissed Etta's forehead, he caught a glimpse of her journal, a single word visible. "Poison." His stomach twisted, but he brushed it off, unwilling to face the crack in his perfect world. He left the room, Seraphina's hand on his arm, her perfume masking the bitterness beneath. Etta waited until they were gone, then opened her journal, her pen trembling. "She's tearing us apart, but I won't let her win," she wrote, her heart heavy but resolute. The city's lights blinked outside, indifferent to her pain. Thane in his room stared at the fountain pen, Etta's voice echoing, "Write your dreams, but never forget your heart." Doubt crept in, a whisper of truth he wasn't ready to hear. What darkness hid behind Seraphina's charm? Could Etta's love survive the shadows closing in? Thane Caldwell's heart raced as he stepped into the penthouse. A single ticket to an Aretha Franklin tribute concert at Carnegie Hall clutched in his hand. He'd canceled a late meeting, driven by a nagging need to see Etta, to erase the doubt that had taken root last night. The word poison from her journal haunted him, a splinter in his mind. He'd meant to surprise her, to see her eyes light up at the thought of soul music filling the air. The faint hum of respect drifted from the living room, a melody that should have warmed him, but a sharp voice cut through it, chilling his blood. Seraphina's voice, laced with venom, pierced the air. "You're useless, Etta. Thane only keeps you out of pity." Thane froze, his breath catching, the ticket trembling in his grip. He moved silently toward the sound, his polished shoes soundless on the marble floor. Rounding the corner, he saw her, Seraphina, radiant in a pearl-white silk dress, her face twisted with contempt. She loomed over Etta, who clung to the arm of a velvet chair, her cane toppled on the rug. Seraphina's foot lashed out, striking Etta's shin, sending a gasp of pain from the 62-year-old woman. "Get out of my way, you old burden," Seraphina hissed, her voice a blade slicing through the soulful notes. Etta's eyes, wide with hurt, locked on the floor, her hands shaking as she tried to stand. The ticket slipped from Thane's hand, fluttering to the ground like a broken promise, its edges tearing against the rug. "How dare you hurt my mother?" Thane's voice roared, a raw, guttural sound that shattered the room's stillness. His fist clenched, his face pale with shock, his eyes burning with a fury he'd never known. Seraphina spun around, her composure crumbling, her mouth opening in a stammer. "Thane, you're home early. I didn't mean—" "Etta provoked me." Her words were desperate, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's, but the lie hung heavy, exposed by the cruelty he'd just witnessed. Thane's chest heaved, his world tilting as the woman he'd loved revealed a monster beneath her polished mask. Every smile, every kiss, now felt like a betrayal, a poison seeping into his heart. Etta, trembling, pulled herself upright, her cane forgotten. Her face was a map of pain, not from the kick, but from the heartbreak she saw in Thane's eyes. "Baby, don't," she whispered, her voice breaking, a plea to shield him from the truth's weight. Her love for him was a fortress, even now, as her shin throbbed and tears welled. She'd endured Seraphina's barbs, spilled wine, hidden pills, cruel words for Thane's happiness, but this moment stripped her bare. "I'm okay," she lied, her voice soft but firm, her eyes begging him not to shatter. Yet the quiver in her lips betrayed her, a silent cry for the son she'd raised to stand tall. Thane stepped forward, his gaze locked on Seraphina, who shrank under its intensity. "You called her a burden?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "The woman who gave me everything?" His mind flashed to Etta's sacrifices. Nights sewing dresses to buy his books, her voice singing him to sleep when nightmares came. Seraphina's face drained of color, her hands twisting. "It was a moment of anger, Thane. You know I love you." But her words rang hollow, each syllable a nail in the coffin of their future. Thane's heart pounded, torn between rage and disbelief, the ticket on the floor a symbol of his shattered trust. Etta reached for him, her hand grazing his arm. "Don't let this break you, Thane," she said, her voice a fragile thread of strength. Her eyes, deep with love, held a pain she'd hidden for too long. She'd written in her journal, night after night, to spare him this moment, but now it was here, raw and undeniable. Thane's throat tightened, his eyes stinging as he saw the truth. Her silence had been a shield, not weakness. He wanted to hold her, to erase her pain, but the weight of Seraphina's cruelty pinned him in place. How had he been so blind? Seraphina took a step back, her heels clicking, her face a mask of panic. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice rising. "She's fine. Look at her." But Thane's gaze never left Etta, whose quiet dignity cut deeper than any words. He saw the bruise forming on her shin, the tremble in her hands, and felt a surge of guilt for every moment he'd spent chasing Seraphina's dazzle. The music stopped, the needle scratching on the vinyl, leaving a silence that screamed. What had Seraphina done in the shadows of his absence? How deep did her cruelty run? Thane's voice broke as he spoke to Etta. "Ma, I'm so sorry." His words were a vow, a promise to see her, truly see her, from now on. Seraphina's pleas faded into the background, irrelevant against the truth laid bare. The city's hum pulsed outside, but in this room time stood still, the air thick with betrayal and love's fierce resolve. Could Thane undo the pain he'd failed to see? What would become of the life he'd built on lies? Thane Caldwell's voice still echoed in his own ears, the raw fury of his words. "How dare you hurt my mother?" Lingering like a bruise. The living room, once a stage for Seraphina's polished charm, now felt like a battlefield, the torn Carnegie Hall ticket a casualty at his feet. Seraphina stood before him, her pearl-white dress stark against her ashen face, her eyes wide with panic. "Thane, please, it was a mistake," she pleaded, her voice cracking, but the desperation in her tone only deepened his disgust. Etta, slumped in the velvet chair, her shin bruised from Seraphina's kick, looked at him with eyes that held a lifetime of love and pain. Thane's heart shattered, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization of how long Etta had suffered in silence. He stepped toward Etta, his hands trembling as he knelt beside her. "Ma, why didn't you tell me?" His voice broke, thick with guilt, his eyes searching hers for answers. Etta's hand, warm and steady despite her pain, touched his cheek. "I didn't want to break your heart, baby," she whispered, her voice a soft melody of forgiveness. Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, spoke of a love so fierce it had borne Seraphina's cruelty to protect him. Thane's throat tightened, his chest heaving with the weight of her sacrifice. He saw the bruise on her shin, a dark mark against her skin, and felt a wave of shame for every moment he'd spent blinded by Seraphina's allure. Seraphina's voice cut through, shrill and grasping. "Thane, you can't throw away what we have. I'm your future." She reached for him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. But he jerked away, her touch now poison. "My future," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You attacked the woman who raised me, who gave me everything. You're nothing to me now." His words were a blade, severing the illusion of their life together. Seraphina's face crumpled, her composure unraveling as she realized the empire she'd coveted was slipping away. Her eyes darted to Etta, a flash of resentment breaking through her tears, but she said nothing, her silence damning. Etta's gaze softened, not for Seraphina, but for Thane. "Don't let anger consume you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She clutched her cane, pulling herself upright, her dignity a quiet force. Thane saw the strength that had carried her through Harlem's hardest nights, the same strength that had lifted him from a broken childhood. But her journal, still open on the table, caught his eye. He glimpsed a line. "Her words are poison, but I won't let them touch him." And his heart sank. How many nights had she written these truths, shielding him from pain? "I should have seen it," he murmured, his voice thick with self-reproach. Etta shook her head, her smile faint but resolute. "You're here now, Thane. That's enough." Seraphina took a step back, her heels clicking like a retreating army. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice rising, a last attempt to cling to her crumbling world. "I made you who you are." Thane's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You made nothing. Etta did." He turned to his mother, his eyes fierce with resolve. "I'm done with you, Seraphina. Leave." Her mouth opened, then closed, her face a mask of defeat. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky, and stormed toward the door, her final glance at Etta laced with venom. The door slammed, the sound echoing like a gunshot, leaving Thane and Etta in a silence that felt both heavy and fragile. Thane sank to the floor beside Etta, his head resting against her knee, the way he used to as a boy. "I failed you, Ma," he whispered, his voice raw. The music had stopped, but Etta's hand on his shoulder was a melody of its own, steady and warm. "You didn't fail me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You saw the truth. That's what matters." Her words were a lifeline, pulling him from the abyss of guilt. He thought of her sacrifices, nights sewing to buy his shoes, her voice singing him through fear, and felt a surge of love so fierce it burned away his doubt. Outside, the city hummed, its lights flickering like distant stars. Thane lifted his head, meeting Etta's eyes. He saw not just pain but a resilience that had shaped him, a love that had never wavered. Seraphina's betrayal was a wound, but Etta's strength was a beacon. He picked up the torn ticket, its edges jagged, and held it like a relic. "We'll go to that concert, Ma," he said, his voice steadying. "Just you and me." Etta's smile broke through, a ray of light in the darkness, but her eyes held a question. Could they heal from this? What scars would linger from the truth laid bare? Thane Caldwell sat beside Etta, his head still resting against her knee, the echo of Seraphina's slamming door fading into the night. The torn Carnegie Hall ticket lay on the rug, a jagged reminder of the life he'd nearly lost to illusion. His heart ached, not just from Seraphina's betrayal, but from the guilt that clawed at him. How had he missed Etta's pain for so long? Her hand, warm and steady, rested on his shoulder, a silent anchor in the storm of his emotions. "You're here now, baby," Etta said, her voice a soft hymn, carrying the soul of Harlem's old nights. Thane lifted his head, meeting her eyes, and saw a love so deep it humbled him, a love that had endured cruelty to shield his heart. Etta's face, etched with lines of resilience, held a quiet strength. The bruise on her shin, a dark shadow against her skin, was a wound Thane felt in his soul. "I should have known, Ma," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. He thought of her sacrifices, sewing dresses late into the night, singing him through nightmares, teaching him to dance despite their empty pantry. She'd been his rock, yet he'd let Seraphina's dazzle blind him. Etta shook her head, her smile gentle but firm. "You didn't fail me, Thane. You saw the truth when it mattered." Her words were a balm, but the guilt lingered, a heavy note in the melody of their bond. He stood helping Etta to her chair, her cane now back in her hand. The room felt different, as if Seraphina's departure had lifted a veil. Thane noticed the scattered programs on Etta's shelf, the ones Seraphina had tossed aside, and his chest tightened. He picked one up, a faded flyer from Etta's performance at the Lenox Lounge, her name in bold letters. "You were a star, Ma," he said, his voice soft. Etta chuckled, her eyes sparkling with memory. "Still am in my own way, just waiting for you to catch up." Her laughter, warm and rich, was a spark of light, pulling him from the darkness of his shame. Thane sat across from her. The soul music paused, but its spirit was alive in their shared silence. He wanted to erase her pain, to fill the space Seraphina had poisoned. "Tell me about Harlem again," he said, leaning forward, his eyes pleading for connection. Etta's face softened and she began, her voice weaving a tapestry of neon-lit nights, where she danced under stage lights, her voice blending with Aretha's on the radio. She spoke of a night she'd sung "A Natural Woman," the crowd swaying, her heart full. "I felt alive, Thane," she said, her eyes distant, "like I could carry the world." Thane listened, his heart swelling, realizing how much he'd missed these stories, how Seraphina had silenced them. He reached for her hand, feeling the calluses from years of work. "I want to hear you sing again," he said, his voice earnest. Etta's eyes widened, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "My singing days are gone, baby," she said, but her voice wavered, a hint of longing breaking through. Thane shook his head, his resolve firm. "They're not. We'll go to that concert, Ma. You and me, like old times." He picked up the torn ticket, its pieces a challenge he'd mend, just as he'd mend their time lost. Etta's smile grew, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You always were stubborn," she teased, her voice warm with love. They moved to the kitchen where Etta insisted on reheating the dinner she'd prepared. Thane watched her, his heart heavy with the weight of her journal's words. Her words are poison. He wanted to ask about every hurt, every moment she'd hidden, but her gentle hum, a snippet of "Chain of Fools," stopped him. She was healing in her own way, and he wouldn't push her into pain. Instead, he helped her set the table, their movements a quiet dance, like the tap steps she'd taught him as a boy. "You're getting better at this," Etta said, nodding at his clumsy attempt to fold napkins. Thane laughed, the sound easing the knot in his chest. Outside, the city's pulse thrummed, its lights a canvas of possibility. Thane felt a shift, a clarity he hadn't known he'd lost. Seraphina's betrayal had cracked his world, but Etta's love was rebuilding it, note by note. He thought of the scarf she'd cherished, the one Seraphina had ruined, and vowed to find another, to wrap her in warmth again. "Ma, what do you want most?" he asked, his voice soft. Etta paused, her eyes meeting his. "Just you, Thane. That's always been enough." Her words were a melody, simple and profound, resonating in his soul. As they ate, the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken promises. Thane saw Etta's strength, her grace under fire, and felt a surge of pride. She'd carried him through a childhood of rejection, and now he'd carry her through this pain. The city outside buzzed, but in this moment, it was just them, a mother and son finding their way back. Could they rebuild what Seraphina had tried to break? Would Etta's light shine brighter than the shadows of betrayal? Thane Caldwell's heart felt lighter as he sat across from Etta, the clink of their forks a quiet rhythm against the soulful hum of Aretha Franklin's "A Natural Woman" still lingering in his mind. Their shared dinner, simple but profound, had woven a thread of healing through the wounds Seraphina's betrayal had left. Etta's smile, warm and unbroken despite the bruise on her shin, was a beacon, guiding him back to the boy who danced with her in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. Yet beneath his relief, a fire burned, a need to make things right, to honor the woman who'd given him everything. He looked at her, her eyes crinkling with laughter as she teased his napkin-folding skills, and felt a surge of purpose. "Ma, I'm going to fix this," he said, his voice steady with resolve. Etta leaned back in her chair, her cane resting against the table, her face a canvas of strength and grace. "You already have, baby," she said, her voice soft but rich, like the soul notes she'd once sung at the Lenox Lounge. Her heart still ached from Seraphina's cruelty, the spilled wine, the hidden pills, the venomous words. But Thane's presence was a salve. She saw the guilt in his eyes, the weight of every moment he'd missed her pain, and wanted to lift it. "You saw me, Thane," she said, her hand reaching for his. "That's more than enough." Her words carried the weight of her sacrifices, nights sewing to buy his books, her voice soothing his fears, and Thane felt them settle in his soul, a call to action. He stood pacing the room, his thoughts racing. Seraphina's shadow lingered, not in her presence but in the damage she'd done. He'd found Etta's journal, its pages filled with her silent endurance. Her words are poison, but I won't let them touch him. Each line was a dagger, cutting through his blindness. I let her hurt you, Ma, he said, his voice cracking, his hands clenching with self-reproach. Etta rose, her cane clicking, and crossed to him. You didn't let her do anything, she said firmly, her eyes fierce with love. You're here now, standing up for me. That's what makes you my son. Her strength, forged in Harlem's toughest nights, was a light that refused to dim. Thane's eyes stung as he looked at the faded poster on her wall, Etta's name bold under stage lights. He thought of her voice, once a force that moved crowds, now silenced by pain and time. You deserve to shine again, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He imagined her singing, not just for him, but for a world that needed her soul. I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you are. Etta laughed, a sound like a melody, but her eyes held a spark of hope. You're dreaming big, like always, she said, her voice teasing but warm. Thane smiled, his heart swelling with a vision, one that would honor her, not with wealth, but with love. He sat her down, pulling out a notebook, not his fountain pen's usual canvas, but a fresh one for a new start. Let's bring Harlem back to you, he said, his voice alive with purpose. He sketched ideas, a community space in Brooklyn, a stage for soul music, a place for kids like he'd been to find their rhythm. Etta's eyes widened, her fingers tracing the notebook's edge. A stage, she asked, her voice trembling with a dream she'd buried. Thane nodded, his resolve ironclad. For you, Ma, for every kid who needs a home. He saw her as she'd been, dancing, singing, fearless, and vowed to give that back to her. Etta's hands shook as she spoke of her past, her voice low but vibrant. I used to sing respect and feel like I could move mountains, she said, her eyes distant. If you do this, Thane, make it for the kids who feel lost, like you did. Her words were a charge, a legacy she'd carried through years of struggle. Thane felt her love, not just for him, but for a community that had shaped them both. He thought of the scarf Seraphina had ruined, the program she'd scattered, and saw them as relics of a strength he'd underestimated. It'll be called Etta's Haven, he said, his voice firm, a place where the soul lives. They sat together, the city's lights flickering outside, a silent witness to their bond. Thane felt a clarity he'd lost in Seraphina's dazzle. Love was the truest wealth, and Etta was its heart. He looked at her, her face glowing with hope, and knew this was his redemption. I love you, Ma, he said, his voice raw. Etta squeezed his hand, her smile a melody. I've always known, baby. The room was quiet, but their hearts sang, a duet stronger than any betrayal. Could this vision heal the scars of the past? Would Etta's light inspire a new legacy? Thane and Etta's journey, from heartbreak to healing, sings of love's unbreakable power, a soulful melody born in New York's vibrant streets. Their story asks us, what would you do to protect those who lift you up? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories of loyalty, betrayal, or redemption inspire us all. If this tale moved you, rate it 1, if not, 0. Your voice matters, weaving new threads into the tapestry of human connection. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for joining us in this emotional ride. Stay tuned for more stories that stir the soul, where love and truth always find their rhythm. Until we meet again, keep the music of kindness playing.